My name is Josh Marshall, and I'm the founding director at Ingenuity Labs here at Queen's University. And today I have been given the privilege of moderating our panel entitled From Pilots to Lead Customers Empowering Municipalities in the Age of AI and Robotics. And I thought I'd start with this quote that I read the other day, and it was by a CEO of Landmark Homes, and he's also apparently the founder of Promise Robotics. And he was quoted as saying, "The adoption of robotics and artificial intelligence within the housing industry is the only viable solution to achieve the goals of governments to build an adequate supply of housing at affordable and attainable prices." I mean, perhaps he's a little biased, but an interesting statement, especially for those of us who are in this space. So yeah, this struck me as quite a statement. And of course, municipalities these days are facing mounting pressures from housing affordability to infrastructure maintenance, things like logistics and urban logistics, which we're going to hear about today. Also being presented with unprecedented opportunities, I think. There's a lot of power now within municipalities to do things, to shape the future, perhaps of robotics and AI to some extent. So this panel is going to explore how cities, municipalities can move beyond being just sort of passive test beds and instead become what we're calling lead customers for robotics and AI companies and technologies, and maybe even sort of actively driving innovation that aligns with the strategic goals and our national priorities that we've been talking about. So we're fortunate to have a really great and diverse, I would say, and deeply experienced group of panelists here today. Nguyen Nguyen is the CEO of Horizon Legacy Construction Automation. She brings a bold vision for how robotics can transform housing development and construction at scale, which is, you're going to hear, I think, a little bit about today. Craig Desjardins, if you can put your hands up when Craig Desjardins is the Director of Strategy, Innovation, and Partnerships here at the City of Kingston, and a good friend of mine. And he's really in charge of sort of leveraging, the city's perspective on partnerships and innovation and making that happen and catalyzing innovation at the city level. Sharif Virani, head of growth at Real Life Robotics. He's going to share some insights from the front lines, I think, of last mile delivery and logistics, where robotics is, I think, really already shaping urban operations. And then last but not least, Jason Wong, manager of industries and government practice at Optimist SBR, comes to us all the way from Edmonton. He brings a strategic lens on how public-private partnerships and industrial cluster strategies can align. So we're going to have a very, I think, interesting and, like I said, diverse discussion. So we're going to explore how municipalities can move from one-off pilots to long-term adoption, how they can help sort of shape a thriving and locally focused robotics ecosystem. So let's dive in. And I'm going to start with Craig, because Craig sort of sits at the core of all this as somebody who represents the city. From your perspective, Craig, what does it mean for a municipality to become a lead customer for AI or AI-enabled robotics?
I don't think you're going to be surprised when I tell you that I think that municipalities are great lead customers. Maybe a little biased, but really, it's probably for a couple of reasons. And one of them is that, as sort of the lowest level of government, we're closest to the problem. We're closest to the consumer, to the resident, to the citizen. I think that's incredibly valuable for the private sector. I also think that, again, I often joke when I talk to groups of students here at Queen's, at St. Lawrence College, RMC, when trying to explain what municipal government is, I tell them we're in every business except mining. When you think about municipal government, I do healthcare, I do security, I do construction, I do entertainment, I do recreation. There's literally nothing I don't do, which is part of the problem. But it certainly makes for a very exciting enterprise, and we're operationally delivering these services. But I think the role is certainly changing and evolving. We're seeing really being driven by sort of those cost pressures that Josh sort of alluded to, delivering all of this services, whether it's programming, whether it's asset management, or whether it's new sort of capital investments. We're being squeezed. Our business model, their only source of revenue is property taxes, and you just can't keep increasing that every year at a huge amount. I think you're also seeing a new perspective and more collaboration across municipalities as we sort of band together. Again, we're not not competing. We each have our own separate markets. We don't compete in the markets with each other. I guess there's some competition for investment or economic development, attraction. But, how are we working together? Is it geographic sort of collaboration? Is it across sort of municipal associations? How do we sort of de-risk or reduce risk and share risk with each other? I think you're going to see much more of that. But from a City of Kingston perspective, I think there's sort of three complementary sort of pathways this is how we sort of approach things. The first is sort of research collaborations. And again, I noticed MyTech's logo on the top. I don't think a year goes by that I don't have a MyTech student or two or three or four. So if there's MyTech's people here, thank you very much. We appreciate that. But again, those research collaborations are based on the relationships we've created with our post-secondary. And that includes Queen's, RMC, and certainly St. Lawrence College. And it's, I didn't see Amy Wu here. She's probably here somewhere. We have an NSERC robotics project that's ongoing right now. There's invariably 2 or 3 NSERC projects that we're doing. That level of collaboration and research is just so important. The second is really that startup pilots, and it's really working with those startup companies, investing access to our infrastructure, access to our city staff. It really is almost an investment. I think that this category is the one that's probably getting squeezed because of the financial constraints of municipalities. Because the third is the one that we have a growing interest and would love to see. Josh was sharing how many private sector attendees there are. Is really the adoption of proven technologies. How do we sort of increase the amount and adoption of technologies that actually have a proven ROI and a pathway to procurement?
Thanks, Craig. I'm going to jump to Sharif, because I want you to kind of respond to Craig to a certain extent. I mean, from the other side of it, what does it take for you to turn the city into a paying customer?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a challenge. It takes a lot, but I'll give you some tips. So one is, we don't go to the traffic department when we try to implement things, okay? Because traffic department is trying to model out all the situations and scenarios, and when you're running a growth experiment, you don't have those answers, right? So that's kind of a fruitless conversation, a bit of a frustrating conversation. When you go to the city, you have to give them a path forward that they can say yes to. So for example, when we go to robot delivery, we're not asking them, can we do robot delivery on your streets willy-nilly? We're giving them a plan, a roadmap that the city can evaluate, say yes to, it's backed by evidence and support from us. And at the end of the day, scared money doesn't make money. So that's how you keep everyone honest on that path. So, I'd ask everyone here quickly, who's working in robotics right now? Just maybe put your hand up quickly. Okay. Who knows, and keep your hand up, please, sorry. Keep your hand up if you know the North Star metric of your company. Okay, well, see, that's a huge problem, right? And that's a problem that's kind of facing Canadian robotics across the board. And that North Star metric is what keeps these partnerships honest, okay? It keeps you both in line, it keeps you both running in the right direction and on the same goal, which is offering better services to our friends, families, and neighbors. That's why we're doing what we do. And so that's part of that equation there. And it's a bit of a different approach, I think, that we've taken before. As innovators, we frequently take this loading dock approach to innovation in Canada. It doesn't work. We can't rely on people to do our science communication for us. We have to be the ones to explain the value of our research and innovations. And so that's kind of a mindset change that we have to do here, because in Canada, you do your research, very particularly in the government, gets dropped off, and then we rely on people to communicate those findings and make it enticing for adoption to happen. Well, they don't know it. It's us that knows the numbers, right? It's us that knows the results. We've touched the problem, we've felt the problem, we've smelt the problem. And we need to keep getting our hands dirty if we want to get mass adoption across the board.
Okay, thanks, Sharif. Nyong, okay, tell us a little bit about Horizon Legacy, because I think you really got an interesting case study here. And first, a little bit about that, and then how you're planning to use, or you're using robotics on job sites, and then how maybe that relates to what you heard from both Craig and Sharif, I think, about integrating that into maybe the bigger picture with regards to housing and municipalities and so forth. So let's hear a little bit about Horizon Legacy in your experience. Sure.
So Horizon Legacy has been around, a Canadian-based real estate developer, for 7 decades. We were founded shortly after World War II. We've owned and operated around 7 million square feet of commercial and residential real estate. mostly developing from start greenfield to completion and then owning them for a number of decades. About 20 minutes from here in an adjacent town called Gananoque, we're about to complete the first and largest neighborhood in Canada built using an on-site robotics strategy. So it's a 26-unit townhouse complex. 30% of the units are affordable rentals. It's an example, it was our first project, but it's an example of how we deployed robotics and automation in an on-site strategy. And by the way, we used ABB robots as a core infrastructure backbone. For us, for the audience to provide some context as to why we're doing this. So in Canada right now, we have to build around 5 million homes. And we need to do that to address the cost of living and the availability of housing, the housing supply. And we have to do that in about 10 years, according to the Government of Canada. So that's first the problem. Second problem is that in the same period, 1 in 5 construction workers are about to retire. So we're about to experience, and we're undergoing a big brain drain. And the third problem is that the construction industry has been having a very difficult time over the last number of decades to recruit people into construction. So productivity in construction is at an all-time low, and it continues to decline. So this problem affects all of us because it's about a quality of life issue, the cost of housing. What we see at Horizon Legacy is an opportunity to deploy robotics and automation from the top down. So instead of from the bottom up, companies can build, processes or mobile robots and task-based robots. But what we envision is sort of a top-down approach, a coordinated approach across the entire country, across different sectors, and we'd like to, invite some of you here perhaps to partner or participate with us to do that. We have a model for housing development, a completely different business model for housing development in partnerships with municipalities, social housing groups, to advance housing in a completely different way using technology and of course, robots.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I did get to visit the site, and I have to say, if you do get a chance to visit it, it's quite something to see and open my eyes to what I think is a big opportunity in that space, or ways to improve it and make it better and grow it at scale. So that's interesting. Jason, you come from a different perspective. City of Edmonton, doing some large projects really related to engineering, construction, robotics. When it comes to projects with municipalities, so like the City of Edmonton, which is bigger, what do you see as the single biggest barrier that keeps these robotics projects rather in pilot mode as opposed to moving forward at scale?
Sure. So maybe just to start with a bit of background, Optimus SBR is a management consulting firm, the largest independently owned firm in North America, and our work partly focuses on government, and we work with many municipalities. So that's kind of the perspective that I'll kind of bring to that question. Just to kind of maybe stay on theme, I'll use the word kind of misalignment as kind of the single biggest barrier, and I'd like to maybe break that down into three things. The first being related to some of the funding model reviews that we've gone in and done with some municipalities across the country. There's a general risk aversion, I would say, in terms of cities are stewards of public dollars, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is how municipalities need to work, but that's why pilots are so attractive, is because they're reversible, they're defensible, and they're safe. The second piece is related to, and no offense at all through anything I was saying here, I'd say there's some siloed accountability that happens in some municipalities, and once again, this kind of goes back to how municipalities tend to be structured organizationally, is that when you have teams or individuals who really champion these cool, innovative projects or take on kind of robotics pilot, sometimes those teams and those individuals don't necessarily, are unable to see it all the way through because they don't control the budgets, or they're not necessarily controlling the operations, whatever it might be. There's sometimes that disconnect that occurs. And then the third piece, which I'm actually the most interested in because I think it's probably the lower hanging fruit, is related to procurement. And so I know we've heard kind of about procurement earlier this morning on several different conversations, but I think right now procurement is very much viewed from municipal lens or even provincial and federal as kind of cost compliance focused. And there isn't necessarily room within procurement for that experimentation. And I think that's a missed opportunity. So I think alignment between those three things are what leads to just kind of pilots running over and over rather than scaling.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the room would agree with you. I want to go back to Sharif, because I do think that empowering municipalities in the age of AI and robotics, I mean, we need to make money, and it is about private-public partnerships, really, right? And so, in your experience, what does a meaningful private-public partnership really look like at the curb, as you say in your business, I think, right? And in the command center, what does it look like on your spreadsheet? And what business models are working?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you look at sustainable tech on the whole in America, we've always tried to lead with the environmental impact. That never drives mass adoption. It might work in some Scandinavian countries. It hasn't worked here. If you look at the history of biofuels, billions of dollars were spent there. But they really didn't quantify the economic impact. And on a municipal level, municipality runs like a business in a very similar sense, right? It's a business. They're concerned about local economic impact. So you very much have to quantify the potential economic impact that your technology will bring, right? So looking at that, reversing it back, what are you building, right? Are you looking to launch a pilot with the city just to test a technology, just to get from a certain TRL level to a certain TRL level? Okay, but not all cities are looking for that, right? Right now, our cities are kind of in 911. We've got death of the main street, we've got funding and labor issues. So turning our cities into kind of science expos in a way, it's not practical for all places. But if you can pull in that economic impact and move the needle there, you can give them a reason to start deploying some funds. So it's very important you lead with that. And so the question I ask you all here today is, what are you trying to do as a business? Are you just building technology and capturing IP, which we do so well in Canada, or are you building a real business? Are you here to play? Are you a tourist or are you a professional?
Can you give us an example? Like
Yeah,
in your particular space,
For sure.
You've had some successes. So what actually has worked in your
I'll tell you right now. So when I was back with Tiny Mile, when I first started robot delivery, most of the people on the team came from the automotive sector. And so our North Star metric was increased miles traveled, which is great when you're in the car industry, right? You want your car to last the most miles traveled. But what about the delivery industry? That's kind of the reverse. You actually want the least amount of miles and the most amount of money generated for it. Totally opposite. And so when I came back to Canada to start doing real-life robotics company with Cameron over here, we rejigged that metric. And we qualified it as increased number of successful deliveries, where we qualify that as one is paid or break even, and would be used again or recommended to a friend. We're building a business. So in there we have profitability and we have stickiness built in. That generates a business outcome. It generates ideally some revenue. And that gives everyone some incentive to be involved in here, and which is bettering our society. And so that's something that you need to kind of align on, and that's why I kind of lean back to that North Star metric. What's your North Star metric going to be for that project? When you have multiple partners involved, it's kind of like this year was kind of my job just to make sure all these 6 partners we had we're following the same direction. It's like every day, hey, remember we're going east. Hey, remember we're going east, because they all have their own individual goals. But of course, our goal again is bettering the lives of Canadians. And so we keep everyone aligned to that with an emphasis on profit, because right now Canada needs profit, right? Entrepreneurship, all-time low, cost of doing business, all-time high, GDP dropping. So that's a problem system, like that's across our country right now, that's relevant to everyone. And it's something that you can use to start implementing pilots across the country.
Yeah, awesome, thanks, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna jump back to Craig. And maybe given what you've heard here, Kingston, I don't want to say it's a tiny municipality, but it's a smaller municipality, right? Smaller than Edmonton, not Toronto, Montreal, or New York City, right? But as a smaller municipality, given what you just heard, what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of being an early adopter for AI and robotics? And can you provide more or less to those kind of companies like Sharif was talking about, or Noon's opportunities? Or, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In terms of advantages, I think acting early is an opportunity from an economic development perspective to anchor companies in your community. I think when it comes to, and again, we're very fortunate being a small a smaller city. Oftentimes in Kingston we say we're big enough, but also small enough to make things happen. We actually are blessed with the collaboration density of Queens, St. Lawrence, and RMC that really creates an ecosystem that again, it creates network effect, it creates collaborations that spawn other collaborations, that spawn new ideas. That's maybe a very specific to Kingston as opposed to generally for other small municipalities. But that's a huge piece. I would say the other piece, and it does sort of align to the smaller but bigger, it is about people. Entrepreneurs are people with families. With kids, the fact that my kids may be on the same soccer team with Josh's kids, and when we're standing beside each other and on a cold fall morning, it's amazing how much collision and collaboration can happen when you get to know people and you get to know pathways. That certainly I've seen actual examples of advantage in that regard. In terms of disadvantages, again, to the challenge that municipalities are having right now, I don't think it's small or big, but certainly the fiscal capacity is driving, again, a focus on implementation-ready products that can be procured. I think the talent bandwidth, we have a good size staff, but the capacity of everybody is shrinking every day. So how do you get into and get in front of, you get in front of me? This morning I was talking about recruiting family physicians, and that's been my focus this morning. This afternoon it's robotics, but it's a pretty full day. And certainly to the comment earlier about procurement, that is, I don't want to throw my procurement colleagues under the bus, but I think if there's anything that municipalities could do to improve things, it's innovation in procurement. I think that is a huge opportunity.
Amazing, Craig. I think Sharif wants to...
I would just say I would second that. I'd advise anyone looking to engage with the city on a pilot to enter that discussion through the innovation department or through the economic development department. That is one that will, extend their hand to you, that will take the time to understand. Again, because if you go to the traffic department, they want the modeling. You don't have the modeling yet, so it's not the right place to go, right? And we have to kind of be honest a little bit too as roboticists about what are we presenting to people? What is the true story here? There's there's this debate online. I saw the other day something from Brad Adcock, and everyone's talking about vaporware and robotics. Well, there's a point where it's like we need the bold dollars to make things work, but we also need to be honest and need to empower our whole industry. And that might mean rolling back some things when we work with cities and saying we're going to bring you market-ready technology, right? So what are you delivering? Is it the service you're delivering? It's very hard to develop hardware, software, and then a service at the end that's supposed to pay it all back, and do that in a 3-month period with the city. I don't have to explain that, right? So focus on a small part of that, right? Prove out the concept of robot delivery. Maybe you have to leverage some other hardware and software that's proven and works, right? So there's some confidence there. And then you can roll back and start to build the other homegrown technology once you've built that concept, right? And you've shown that there's a market there. You've shown that it works. And so that's something that we have to do as roboticists. It's not always about building our own technology. I would love a robot army of Sharifs, but that probably wouldn't save local delivery for Canada, so it's not really my focus.
Okay, maybe to keep on the sort of scale of the municipality, you have a choice when you're a robotics company. Where do you deploy? Do you deploy in a small city first? Do you then grow to a bigger city? Do you deploy in a big city and then find out that really I should have gone? I don't know, and maybe there's no one answer to that question. I'm gonna maybe come back to Sharif in a second, but ask Neum. You chose Gananoque, which is not a city, I would say. It's a really small tourist-ish town, beautiful on the... How did that come about as the place where you were going to try robotic construction first, and why?
So it was about speed. At the time, we were looking for a site as developers to purchase land and then, demonstrate this new innovative technology. And for the audience in the room who are not familiar with or coming from a construction or real estate background, it's an industry that's very regulated, and you have to go through a rigorous building permit approvals process. And what we wanted to prove was this is not sort of a one-off project. We wanted to pass the bar with respect to the Ontario Building Code to show that this building methodology is in compliance and performance-wise with the Ontario Building Code. So we were in consultation with 3 municipalities at that time, and they were all interested, and they all saw themselves as leading innovative municipalities and wanted to be on the map in that regard. But it was really the town of Gananoque, the then mayor, even current mayor, planning committee, chief planning officer, and chief building officer that, you know, I was telling Jason, you know, we met with them, said what we wanted to do, and within a couple of weeks, we were able to, you know, gain confidence that this was going to happen. And it wasn't, you know, the municipal building process and the construction process is highly subject to political interference or, you know, NIMBYism, et cetera. And it's also sort of a coin toss whenever you get your building permit and you say, I'm doing something new. It's subjective to whoever you get at the, you know, the reviewer, you know, responding to your application. So what we found in the, you know, basically a year and a half that we worked with them, that they were really on board from the top level down to the, you know, to the reviewer. And they just were very open and just, you know, made it happen. So if there are any, you know, people in the municipal world here, I would encourage you to, how you embrace new technology is you kind of remove the obstacles and the challenges. And that's how you know, invite tech companies like folks in this room to do something in your community. I think right now the mood and the country needs deregulation. So to the extent that we can achieve the same objectives, but remove the red tape, remove the, it's really about feeling control, like regulation is really about control. But to the extent that we can achieve your objective, knowing that this is going to meet national standards or provincial standards, but speed up the process, that will help technology and innovation.
So did you say that you had an issue with building code, like having to show that your robotic build met a code that
Yeah.
the code?
Yeah, because, yeah.
That was something extra you had to do because it was robotic? Is that, did I understand that?
Yeah, we had to show that the performance and the technology was building, you know, a building envelope that had to meet structural performance, thermal performance, water, all those things. And so we knew that when we were going in. And there's functional tests, so it doesn't prescribe how you do it, but it's sort of performance-based. Can you perform in the equivalent way traditional build methods? So we did that, and the chief building official and the planner were very rational about it. You know, so they relied on, you know, we got the best engineers in the country to work on it, and so those things we just kind of worked rationally on, and it worked. So
Great. So just for the audience, we've got about 15 minutes or just less left. We are going to try to open it up, I think, to people who may want to ask a question to the panel for this panel. So I think Katie's up here at the front. She can wave. I'm going to ask Sharif and Jason if they want to comment, because I see they're both kind of itching to say something. But if you have a question, feel free to come on up, and Katie will give you the mic, and you can join the conversation. Okay, maybe we'll go Jason and then Sharif.
Yeah, sure. I think that provides, I think, a really good example. You know, I know we're here to talk about innovation in terms of embedding, you know, robotics within, say, municipal services, but I think that's also a really good example about innovation in terms of how to think about how government works and the amount of creativity for the municipal audience that's maybe it's sometimes required in order to do that type of innovation within your services. And what I mean by that is, you know, could you look into municipal development corporations, or in Ontario, municipal services corporations, for example, which kind of act as agencies, boards, and commissions under municipalities. You still have that oversight, but because you create kind of that arm's length relationship, you can create agencies that essentially have the ability to act faster. And to your point, Neil, like there's an aspect of deregulation, you're basically creating that entity to act as a developer. So there's a lot of creativity and innovation that I think is required from also municipality governance front, not just using robotics in municipal services.
I think there's an element of Craig was talking about the cities in the business of humans, right? So this is human-centric development of services. It needs to take a human-centric approach. So have you earned the right to solve that problem, right? And what I mean by that is, are you just reading reports? Like when I got the phone call from Cameron to say, hey, do you want to do robot delivery again? First, I looked in the mirror and said, am I crazy? Then the next call was to my buddy who owned a restaurant and said, can you hire me for 2 months? I want to come work in your restaurant. I don't care what it is. And so I went for 2 months undercover. I wanted to hear what was being said around the water cooler at midnight, at 11 p.m. I wanted to see what was in their walk-in. I wanted to see everything. There wasn't anything that got by me. And that's the only way I can solve that problem is if I have a bird's eye view of it. And so, as innovators, as problem solvers, have you earned the right to solve that problem for those people? So you can speak to them, so you can win their endorsement, right? You can win industry buy-in, for example. All these industries that we're talking about right now, like especially in the construction industry, there's apprenticeships that are involved. There's carpentry, there's masons. Like that's knowledge that's passed on from one to another. There's a hierarchy on the job site, right? You need to buy into that. You need to earn the industry's trust. They will help you push it along if you show them how you can help them, right? So everyone has to have skin in the game, and you have to empower those relationships. And if you empower those relationships, you can implement real change and you can build with purpose.
Great. Is there a question? Anybody got a question? If you want to put your hand up, I think Katie can pass you the mic if there is. I can't really see, so only Katie can see, perhaps. Sharif, I wanted to just come back to you again because you had a successful deployment at a zoo, right?
We did.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
We can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah,
I would say.
And what was successful there, and what can translate from that experience, I think, is what.
Totally.
Because then I'm going to come back to Craig to ask him a question after I hear what you say.
Yeah, so we very much took like a walk before you run approach, right? And so part of that was, again, looking at what are people paying us for at a company at Real Life Robotics at that time. And at that time, they were paying us for robot delivery. No one was paying us for the robot. And so at the zoo, we were testing the concept of robot delivery, and if anyone would pay us for robot delivery, then we came down the line and realized, yes, they would. And so now I went back and looked at that equation on the board. How do I accomplish a successful delivery? Well, it turns out I didn't need to build my own software, or I needed to build an operations layer on top of it. We call it Passenger, and then we had some hardware that we got from our partner over at KiwiBot. And that's what allowed us to scale up our operation in Markham that we did with Skip in under 4 months for a pretty, let's just say, bootstrapped sum of money. Can't say too much. But we were able to do that in under 4 months in Markham. We hit all our KPIs, and it was quite successful. I was quite pleased with the results. But how did we do that? We took a walk before run approach. So we used the zoo as kind of a closed testing environment to just validate kind of the whole TRL levels. All the technology worked. Everything was possible in Canada, low latency. And then we took it to the city and said, hey, look what we've done. This all works now. Can we go do it in the city and show you that it can make money and make the lives of citizens better? And that was, of course, something that they wanted to hear and wanted to work with us on. So that was kind of how that journey happened.
Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah, neat. I think that's good to hear. So Craig, then, from your perspective, and maybe just specifically with regards to the city of Kingston, when you hear or you're approached by companies like Nunes or Sharif's, how do you decide which you take on and which ones you don't? I think that's the big question, and it'd be useful for those in the room who are thinking about this.
Absolutely.
What are the criteria that you use to, as a municipality, to really make a decision? What things have to happen first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, considering sort of those three elements from a research perspective, obviously we'd love to work with a major economic driver of our community. It's more about privacy and security compliance. It's low risk, sort of operational, and again, it's for the public good. So we're all over that. It's very much an aligned perspective. For the startup pilots, it's really an economic development play. It's what is the impact in terms of employment, of GDP growth. Maybe it's brand reputation that's going to provide value. So how do you assess that? More for the proven technology, it's ROI. But with all those different sort of components, it's financial impact. Like, is it going to save us money? Are we going to avoid cost? The time horizon is not 20 years, it's 3 years. We need to save money today or tomorrow. It's strategic fit. It'd be interesting if somebody used AI to upload all the strategic priorities or strategic plans of municipalities across. across Canada. I suspect what it would tell you is, housing is probably number one. Climate action may have dropped a little bit, but it's probably pretty high. It's probably about the same 5 things for every municipality, and it's transparent. It's on my website. I tell you what my priorities are. And the last one is really scalability and integration. So what's the pathway to full adoption, and what's or to actual procurement, and how do we make that happen? That's sort of what we use as criteria.
Great, thanks, Craig. Yeah, anybody want to respond? I think we have a question here in the corner, so I'll let our
Hi, Josh, it's Lee. And Craig, thank you. I actually want to follow up on your comments, and we've had previous conversations. My sense is that the municipalities aren't necessarily the best customer for the robotics companies, but maybe it's their suppliers to the municipalities. And so when you think about like the building, the construction company, like you had to deal directly with them and then bring the robotics onto your site to build the property. And Craig, we talked about things like security and surveillance robots and how much you spend right now on security, but you're not looking to necessarily find another company, you have to validate another company to replace the security vendors that you currently deal with, because then you'd have to deal with, union issues and, all kinds of, labor issues. So I just feel like maybe we need to broaden our conversation beyond sort of robotics and think about how do we tell our stories more effectively. I'm so excited to hear about the case study program, but my question really is, Craig, as you've continued this journey and work and get pitched by technology companies, what advice can you give about how that might span out across some of the key service suppliers that you have? Thank you.
That's an amazing question, and Jason mentioned about municipal service corporations. I think one of the things we're exploring is how do we create better mechanisms to receive innovation. So again, you mentioned about the unions. We have a collective agreement environment that we have to work in. We value our union partners, but the specter of physical AI is got everybody freaked out. So everybody's nervous, is this thing gonna take my job? So understanding how the business model can change and adapt, how additional structures like municipal service corporations might actually be mechanisms to actually help us advance or introduce technologies in a more rapid way. I think these are the kind of things we're exploring.
Great, thanks, Craig. I think we have Hallie? No? Okay, or we're gonna go over here. Yep.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kaylee Thiessen, the Chief Economist at the Canadian Shield Institute for Public Policy. So I have a question about public policy. As you were going through the process of building the townhouses, you mentioned that you needed some deregulation. I'm curious, what rules did you have to change, or was it norms of how the folks were working together that needed to change?
Yeah, it was about standards. So we had to undergo structural performance testing, thermal performance testing to prove that the robotic construction process, wall assemblies, work, it could work in a Canadian cold climate environment, for example. So at the time, because it's a new technology, there were no established standards for doing that. So we were kind of having to develop our own internal standards. The speed at which standards are established is a snail's pace. It can take 5-10 years. So luckily, we had a route that we could, undergo to not have to go through that rigorous process. And I think the National Research Council has been very cooperative and supportive of robotics and industrialized, or what they call modern methods of construction. The Canadian government right now is talking about how we can industrialize construction, which has historically been a very craft-based trade, if you think about it. It's sort of like you bring a whole bunch of pieces of material on site, and then you cut it on site. It's not standardized. Every construction project is a bespoke project. When you compare that to, obviously, shipbuilding, airplane building, or automotive manufacturing, where you have standards for everything, it's no wonder that construction, the cost of housing, is so expensive, because every project is a custom project. And if you imagine if you bought a car and you ordered a custom car, imagine how expensive it would be. instead of tens of thousands, it might be $1 million or a couple $1 million. So when we think about how we as a country can move towards industrialized construction, we have to think kind of big picture. How do we actually approach that from multiple levels? Building permit regulations, federal regulations, building standards that accept and accommodate for digital construction and design using new tools. The digitization, the connection from, for example, building code plans reviews, that process could be standardized. And the speed at which it's currently happening, it's painful in some municipalities and so there's a lot of even municipalities that I think are looking at AI tools to speed up the approvals process. There's many opportunities that exist in this space and many opportunities to think about how regulations can contribute using technologies. It doesn't even have to be robots, it could be at the software level too.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we'll have to end the session. So it's
I'll try and make this quick, I swear. Young, I know you have another project coming up in southwestern Ontario. Speaking about the impact to the community in Gananoque and how you worked with them, in this one specifically, you're working with Indigenous communities as well. And then you also touched on the NIMBYism, that you've dealt with talking with some of the other municipalities. If you've ran into that as well, and how, if you can speak a little bit about that interconnection with the Indigenous community there, and then the people around, and what reception you've gotten.
Thank you, Anthony. Nice to see you again. So Horizon Legacy is undertaking a second build right now. It's the first and largest multi-story residential build in the world using this technology, so we are leading, Canada is leading the world in the deployment of this. The first project in Gananoque was about 5% of the building was built using robots. The second project, and you can imagine only a year later, construction is starting and about 30% of the building will be built using robots. So I hope that kind of opens up the possibility for the folks in this room as to what's possible and how fast it can happen. The reason that we're doing this project is because we're partnered with a famous Indigenous architect, Brian Porter from Turo Architecture. They're an Indigenous-owned architecture firm. And the problem that Brian saw when traveling into, working with over 50 Indigenous communities across Canada and the US is a deep inequality in housing and housing equity, where wood frame construction in sort of remote environments degrade very quickly, and there's air quality and mold issues. The materials break down. It creates health issues. And what he saw in our current process and technology is concrete as a material is very resilient, and it can address this problem. And so we're partnering with Turo Architect to develop this project. We hope that the robot's moving to site next week, so we've been very stressed out about that. But she is going to be on site with a team of 2 teams, so 2 robotic systems. Each team is 4 people, and we're also incredibly proud to share that the majority of the robot deployment team is run by 20 and 30-year-olds. So it's a way to bring new blood into construction. It's a way to bring technology into an industry that's typically, having a reputation of being behind in technology deployment. And we also are excited with Turo that this could be another way to build housing in Canada for Indigenous communities, where it's typically been a big problem area in housing equity.
Thank you. Yeah, and great insight from all of our panelists today. Unfortunately, I think we have to end the session. I think all of them will be around, so if you want to chat with any of them.
I've got a round table, and for all those hands that went down for the North Star metric, you should probably be at that round table.
Attend Charisse round table, exactly. So please join me in giving a big round of applause to our panelists.